lawyers, and first-hand war correspondents, and Piers Morgan looked at all of them and decided what his audience really needed was a comedian who describes himself as a clown. Douglas Murray is watching a 20-year international law career get treated as less credible than a guy whose entire professional qualification is making people laugh.
And at one point, Piers turned to Comic Dave, who he allowed to just run and run and run, whereas Natasha Hausdorff was not allowed to get a sentence out uninterrupted by Piers. At one point, Piers turned to Comic Dave and said, she's treating us like we're clowns. Well,
I've never seen a veteran with a Nazi tattoo.
Wow. What do you think you are? There's a complete, and the most distressing thing about that is, as I say, is not the parody. Fine, everyone's got their own views. Everyone's welcome to extol them. But to regard the international lawyer as not on an equal footing, but less than a comedian who knows nothing about this, is a sign of a further degradation, which I will continue to oppose it. I do not approve of it. I do not like it. I don't think there's anything good that can come from it. And I'm sorry that more people can't say that, and I think they can't say it largely because a large number of people owe or think they owe their celebrity or reach or something to people who are pushing really bad stuff down everyone's throat with no accountability and with nothing even approaching what used to be normal journalistic ethics.
Yeah, I mean, the provocations to create these little fights that get lots of clicks. I don't know if this was the idea, but I was on a podcast with my old friend Jonah Goldberg, and I mentioned Comic Dave Smith, but I've forgotten his name.
Piers Morgan told an international criminal lawyer with 2 decades of courtroom experience that she was treating his comedian guest like a clown. And Douglas's response is the only sane one, which is, what exactly did you think he was when you booked him? If you introduce someone as a comedian and then get offended when a lawyer does not defer to their geopolitical opinions, what are you actually defending, and why does it apparently pay so well?
And the interesting thing about it is that I forget everyone's name all the time. I think I have like dementia, and I can't. At this point, I mean, with all the drinking and all the other things that I do, and I couldn't remember his name. And apparently, this is what I was told. I didn't watch. Apparently, he did like a 20-minute segment on his show where he played it and was like, "My name is Dave Smith. How hard is that?" It's like, well, it's actually ordinary enough to be very hard, to be honest. But I don't. But like that, I didn't listen to it. But it's like I just don't understand what everyone's just looking to have these endless, boring battles all the time. And to your point about get back to the book about this thing, I had the instinct. After October 7th, to go to Israel, where I had just been, about a year before. And I thought, there's going to be a lot of people doing this, and I'm not going to do a great job of it, because I'm going to be one of those parachute guys. But at the beginning of the war in Ukraine, I went to Ukraine immediately. And it took some doing and getting across the border. And there was another journalist who was of the Jeffrey Sachs variety that was there and remained in Poland and was writing, actually went to Poland but would not go into Ukraine, and was writing all about it and remains somebody who writes all about it. But it was important for me to go and to get as close as I could to these people, to go to bases where there were foreign fighters, with Ukrainians, people who were lining up to buy Kalashnikovs, a store in the house, which you could do at that point. And it changed my view on things, and I don't think that's a very surprising thing to say. But to the book, you went to Israel. I mean, you spent a lot of the last couple of years of your life in Israel, and we should point out that you're something of a celebrity in Israel now because of it, right? I mean, you were there, long stretches, I should say.
Well, I wanted to do several things.
Dave Smith apparently did a 20-minute segment because Douglas forgot his name, and that is the funniest possible proof of Douglas's entire argument. Because the man who has physically crossed into active war zones and interviewed survivors of a massacre is the one who cannot remember the name of the guy who has never left his podcast studio, and yet we are supposed to treat their opinions on the conflict as roughly equivalent.
One was I wanted to, because I thought we'd have this period of denial and also celebration of what happened on the 7th. I wanted to get as much detail, colour, fact, much more as I could about what had happened. And I knew I had to see that firsthand and to speak to the victims and to go around the hospitals and the morgues and the family hostage centres and much more, and the prisons, and speak to the people who could tell me what had happened in the round, including the criticisms of what on earth it was that went wrong in Israel that meant the 7th could even happen. And I also knew I knew that there'd be a war, obviously, and I wanted to see the war as close up as I could, which also isn't easy in any way, in any sense of the term. and and then also to try to understand what it was that was happening outside the country that meant the world seemed to have turned on this question, on this conflict, and why so much of the world had gone the way it had. Why on the streets of my own country of birth in Great Britain we should have had people calling for jihad on our streets Saturday after Saturday, calling for the Muslim armies to arise, and so on. And obviously I
not surprising though.
Not surprised.
I mean, remember in 1989 in Bradford and places like that.
I know, but
the
thing is, Michael, as you know, you can be endlessly surprised in a way.
Yeah.
Because there are things that you think, well, I suppose that'll happen, or you write that it'll happen, and it happens, and you are surprised in a way. It still shocks me deeply to see people say, Muslim fundamentalists walking past, the front of Westminster Abbey calling for jihad.
Douglas went to Ukraine immediately, crossed the border while it was genuinely dangerous, went to bases with foreign fighters, and it changed his understanding of the war. No amount of Twitter scrolling ever could, and that is precisely the point he has been making the whole time. Why is the idea that physically witnessing something gives you a deeper understanding of it somehow the most controversial thing a journalist can say in 2026?
I'm not so far gone that I can't find that still deeply viscerally shocking, and still find it deeply viscerally shocking that, for instance, survivors of the Nova Party, the dance party that was going on in the early hours of the morning, when Hamas terrorists came in by the thousands, that I still find it shocking that survivors of the Nova Party should have come to New York, where we're sitting, last year, and that a father who'd lost his daughter at the party should have to, in New York at a commemoration, should have to walk through the streets of New York to people chanting support for the murderers of his daughter. You can see it coming, you can predict it, you can see all of that, and it's still viscerally, gut-wrenchingly shocking that that's normal.
There's a boring question that an interviewer can ask you, but I think it's relevant and kind of necessary here with the conversation about have you been there, what was the thing? I was trying to ask, what was the thing that actually surprised you in this stretch of time from October 7th when you were reporting in Israel? Because in a way that informs the question of why it's important to go and why it's important to do that reporting on the scene.
Too many things to list, but I can give you a couple. One, which I mentioned earlier in the book, was the gleeful evil of Hamas, by which I mean in war people often do evil things, or terrible things, certainly. But to do an evil thing with great glee is a different level in some way.
Did you get in trouble for this, though? Because there's a Nazi comparison in the book in which you say that the Nazis from the Wannsee conference tried to hide it.
A father who lost his daughter at the Nova massacre had to walk through the streets of New York while crowds chanted support for the people who killed her. And Douglas says he still finds that disgustingly shocking, even though he saw it coming, and that combination of prophecy and horror is genuinely one of the most disturbing things about this entire period.
I mean, there's a reason that the death camps were in Poland and not in Germany, further out. Not only did Hamas not try to hide it, publicized it.
No, they live streamed it, they GoPro'd it.
Yeah.
That's a point too subtle for some people to understand, but we don't need to have, as it were, who's the worst Nazi competitions.
Yeah.
But it was a late friend of mine, George Weidenfeld, the publisher, who fled the Nazis from Austria in 1938, who said to me, shortly before he died, that he thought there was something about Hamas and these groups that made them another level. And what it was the glee, the joy, and the boastfulness. And I said recently, maybe in the book, I said it's as if the Nazis had live streamed from Treblinka. Again, we don't need gradations of it in a way. It's not who's the worst Nazi, but just in terms of, again, the fact that the hell is a bottomless pit, that the terrorists of the 7th would have been so orgiastically keen and proud of what they were doing was something that shocked me and still stays with me. I think, like anyone who has seen what they did, I'm still, I suppose, in a way processing how that can happen, how somebody can end up there. And then I suppose the other things that struck me and strike me still about it is, and it's something I bring across in the book and I'm very proud of, which is that having spent time with the young men and women of the IDF in particular, seeing them go back into Gaza when no Israeli wanted to go again and fight a war to kill or capture the leadership and membership of Hamas and to get back the hostages, to see them going back through the fences that Hamas broke in through to get into Israel.
George Weidenfeld fled the Nazis in 1938, told Douglas before he died that Hamas represented something that even reached another level of depravity, specifically because of the glee and the boastfulness and the live streaming. And when a man who survived actual Nazism tells you something he witnessed felt worse, in a specific way, you do not dismiss that comparison because a comedian on a podcast made you feel like nuance was elitist.
There were many things I saw, but I suppose that among other things is, I have thought, I was talking about this recently in a podcast with Jordan Peterson, I think that it's inevitable that if you stare at real evil, and again, it's something I've written about quite a lot in this book, you run out of non-theological terms to use, but it also makes you have to reflect on then what the opposite is. And one of the opposites is wild, but generous and knowing sacrifice for others for the good. And I tell a story, for instance, in the book of a father who threw himself on a grenade that the terrorists threw into the family bomb shelter to save his 2 sons who were with him. Or the young girl whose family I visited who had signed up to go back into reserves immediately after the 7th and was killed on her first day in action. These stories, but I think, yes, I think in the end that those are the stories also that stick with me, and many, many hundreds and thousands of others. A young man who had been at the Nova party and who knew a way out in a car, and he, because Hamas had made sure that the main exit was filled with cars, but they killed everyone in the cars, so there was a big logjam, and then they could kill more people in the cars, and you couldn't get out that way from very early on in the massacre. But this young man knew another way out, and got into a car and took 4 or 5 young people who didn't know.
A young man at the Nova massacre drove survivors to safety, went back a second time for strangers he did not know, went back a third time, knowing it was certain death, and Hamas killed him on that third trip. And Douglas carried that story all the way into his book, because when you spend enough time staring at genuine evil, the moments of extraordinary human goodness become the thing your mind needs to hold on to, just to stay intact.
Drove them 20 miles away, dropped them off in a nearby town, and when they asked him not to, nevertheless he did, he went back. And they said, it's certain death, you can't go back, and he did. And he got another car full of young people who he didn't know, and he took them and he dropped them off in this town. And he went back a third time, and the third time Hamas killed him and the people he was with. But that instinct to do good and to save life is also what you end up remembering, because it's the glittering of moments of light in the darkness, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, the thing that it hasn't surprised me, again, these are the things that don't surprise you, but manage to still kind of jar you a little bit, is that, you've had 2 attacks, one in Washington, D.C. And I don't like pointing this out, because I think it's unnecessary to point out. People say, well, they were at a fundraiser for, getting food and supplies into Gaza. It doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter if they were Likud.
Yeah, Smotrich's kids or something, doesn't make a difference. But 2 people assassinated in Washington, D.C. A few days later, some undocumented Egyptian by way of Kuwait is throwing Molotov cocktails. It just really hasn't made a dent in the news. And I imagine if there was someone doing that and it was a racially motivated attack against a different group, we'd be having marches and we'd be having reckonings and things like that. But it just doesn't really dent the psyche of anybody within news organizations, as far as I can tell.
Well, I actually just read my column in your post before coming here. I mentioned that the main news story about the Molotov cocktail terrorist in Boulder, Colorado, is at the moment is that his family, and specifically his eldest daughter, have been taken in by ICE and look like they'll be deported.
2 Jewish people were assassinated in Washington, D.C. And a few days later, someone threw Molotov cocktails at Jews in another American city. And both stories basically disappeared from the news cycle. And Douglas is asking the question that should be plastered on the front page of every newspaper in the country, which is whether anyone genuinely believes for a single second that these attacks against any other group would have received the same spectacular level of collective indifference. So, any thoughts on what Douglas Murray just discussed? Share them in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so that you never miss any of our future debates.
Dub Jr., you take it.
Coach, you should run the Customize with Liberty Mutual and Save Hundreds play.
That's not a play.
Okay, but you could save hundreds on car insurance play.
Also not a play. Center it.
Only pay for what you need.
Liberty, 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 liberty.
We're in New York City trying the best food from countries competing in the the world's biggest soccer competition. We've got 3 spots, each crazier than the next for completely different reasons. From a nearly $1,000 tasting menu to a chaotic home-style feast in one of the wildest restaurant setups I've ever seen, and even a
the riots that you recall in Tehran a few months ago, where they said that Iran murdered hundreds of thousands of people, tens of thousands of people, and all that sort of nonsense. Those weapons were provided to the rioters who were trying to stage a coup or a military insurrection, and yet they failed. All of these were carried out under the full support, with full support from the Americans and the Israelis, on many occasions, British intelligence, and sometimes with French intelligence participating as well.
When it comes to the Strait of Hormuz, yesterday we've learned something like 33 ships or vessels passed through the Strait of Hormuz today, something like that. But there is a new statement, a joint statement by France and the United Kingdom, which was condemned by the Deputy Foreign Minister Qarib Abadi, and he condemned what these two countries are trying to do with some sort of cooperation. I don't know what is understanding of Iranians of these two countries coming to Oman and making new connection with Oman and trying to get closer to Oman, and how effectively can they change the situation in the Strait of Hormuz. Is that of concern for Iranians?
Well, if Oman wants to have good relations with Iran, then it will refrain from doing anything against Iran. They've done that during the war. They've refrained from participating in the war like Kuwait and the Emirates and Saudi Arabia and Qatar and Bahrain. And they benefited from this. And I doubt that they will be persuaded by two unimportant countries like the British and the French, who don't have a military and who have their hands full with their dirty war in Ukraine. So I don't think that Oman will do anything foolish in this regard, because Iran won't tolerate it, no doubt. And the French and the British are not a force to be that Iran takes seriously. So again, the Deputy Foreign Minister said what needed to be said, but if they really move in the wrong direction, then that would mean that Iran would have to deal with it in a different way.
What is the understanding on the part of Iranians when it comes to the moves or the way that the United States, it seems that Iran is reported, some reports in Iran say that the United States is sending weapons to the region. What is that? Is there any sort of evidence that the United States is trying to send more weapons, forces to the region, and to try to do something, or maybe before midterm election in the United States?
It's not impossible. The Americans, after the ceasefire, they sent lots of equipment to the region, and a lot of that equipment was for land operations, and they brought in troops for land operations, which could be carried out through Kuwait, or through the Emirates, or from Bahrain, because that's where they've stationed a lot of these from that. But of course they have their planes and their jets and everything else spread out across the region and in Jordan as well. But the land troops for land operations are mostly from land and sea. At least that's how it was a while back in these three countries. But the Iranians are prepared for that. Ever since the ceasefire, the end of the 39-day war, the Iranians have been preparing themselves. They've been rebuilding whatever was damaged. And since the MOU, I mean, some people talk about the MOU as a bad deal, and I don't want to get into that. They've discussed this before. I think it's on. I mean, there's good things about it. There's some shortcomings in it, no doubt. But no one in Iran from the beginning thought that the Americans were going to invade. No one was that naive. I mean, no one with power. But the Iranians wanted to export oil, and they had accumulated a lot of oil in the Gulf that couldn't leave. A lot of tankers they couldn't leave because of the USD. So the MOU allowed Iran to expand very large quantities of oil very swiftly to the market. And that was necessary because we have a population of over 90 million. And with the Afghan probably 95, 96, you gotta appreciate his humor. Noah through with the closer. Waiting today, then check it out. I even shot myself on stage in Charlottesville. But that's just because I'm dedicated to my craft. Actually, the dude's hilarious. He's now developed an entire opening to his show centered around police. And also, Iran has been preparing, building new missiles, new drones, expanding the underground bases, command and control centers, underground command and control centers. They've been replacing many thousands of decoys that were destroyed with new decoys. One of the things that really caused Americans problems was the fact that Iran's key assets were kept underground. They kept bombing them with B-52 bombers to no avail. Another was all those decoys. They kept bombing decoys, destroying decoys, and wasting billions of dollars of money on decoys that were some made in Iran, mostly made in China, from my understanding. And but also rebuilding stocks, because Iran had its supply of grain and wheat and other rice. Iran always keeps a very large supply of all of these things, as you know. And during the war, because of the siege, the Americans prevented this from getting into the country. So the Iranians, the ships that were waiting, they came in, and Iran has been able to purchase more supplies. So Iran has been preparing itself for another war.
Young man.
And it could happen before the midterm elections. It could happen after the midterm elections. But personally, I think it would be an even greater mistake for the United States than the current war, because Iran knows that it will win. It is confident about itself. It has learned about U.S. capabilities. Remember, Iran won the 12-day war, but Iran performed much better in this war because of all that it had learned from the 12-day war. So now the Iranians are even further prepared, and the United States is not in a strong position to fight a war. So it's possible that the Americans would attack, but the Iranians are quite prepared to deal with it.
It seems the biggest issue for the United States right now is the Strait of Hormuz. Isn't that amazing that nobody's talking about the Iranian nuclear program? And it's all about the Strait of Hormuz. And yesterday we've learned that Donald Trump has suggested, or the Trump administration has suggested Iran not to have the fee system, the fee mechanism in the Strait of Hormuz. Instead, they're going to get their frozen assets back. And was there any sort of negotiations, or it was fake? What do we know about that? And what is the Iranian position on this Strait of Hormuz and new mechanism of that?
Neiman, the Americans are always lying. I mean, just like the claim that they informed the Iranians about an assassination or an attempt to assassinate the negotiators, that was a lie. Remember Trump just a couple of days ago, he said that the Iranians have requested a meeting 3-4 days ago in Doha, and I agree, the Iranians did not request anything, and there was no plan to have a meeting, and the Americans sent Witkoff and Kushner, and no one from Iran attended. The following day, there were low-ranking officials in a deputy foreign minister leading a delegation that was planned beforehand to negotiate with Qatar and Pakistan, the mediators, about Lebanon, about Iranian stolen assets, and that was it. So anything that comes from Washington, you should take with like a ton of salt. And this is one of them. The Iranians, of course, are not going to accept relinquishing their control of the Strait of Hormuz. That is permanent, and it's not just fees. The Iranians will control the strait to make sure that its enemies do not use the strait to turn the Persian Gulf region into another war zone again. So no, that's out of the question.
Yeah, it means that no destroyer, no military ship gonna pass through the Strait of Hormuz. Is that the message from the Iranians? Basically, they're gonna control the strait because of the security reasons.
It will be for security reasons, but also there will be a financial aspect to it. There's no doubt about that. They will collect fees. And if Oman does not want to be a part of it, the Iranians have told the Omanis, that's fine. We'll control the strait ourselves, and we will take the fees. If you don't want to be a part of it, you don't have to be a part of it. But Oman being a part of it or not being a part of it is not going to change anything. Iran will control the strait.
Yesterday we had the head of Iranian parliament responding to Donald Trump, and Donald Trump argued, as you know, that Iran is supposed to use money to buy food for their people because right now their people are very hungry and they're buying it and exclusively from the United States, corn, soybeans, and all of this and that. And then we had the response from the head of Iranian parliament, and he says, imagine having 40-something million of your own citizens on food stamps and call another nation hungry. This is not a proclamation. This is a projection. Keep your what?
You know, the thing is, Nima, I'm saying this for your viewers. You know this as well as I. In Iran, we don't have homeless people on the streets. In Iran, we do not have the sort of hunger that we see in many other parts. The government has a responsibility to feed everyone. That's why we always have very large stocks of critical food supplies, and they are subsidized, and they are given to some. Unfortunately, with regards to the subsidies, there are big problems because sometimes people like myself, who are not poor, for the wealthy, we are using subsidies. I mean, I'm not wealthy, but the wealthy too, and people like me who are not poor, we have enormous amounts of subsidies. You know that the price of gasoline in Iran is like 1 or 2 cents a liter, and that would be like 0.89 cents, I guess, for a gallon. That's just one of the subsidies. Electricity is subsidized, water is subsidized, which is, you know, I shouldn't be, but anyway. Food supplies are subsidized. In Iran, we don't have. I mean, there are many difficulties. We have maximum pressure sanctions. That's what they're for, to make life difficult. The war, the bombing of Iranian infrastructure. We've had all that, but we don't have hunger. And it's a bit disappointing for me to sometimes see some supporters of Iran, and I know there are many supporters now across the world. The table has been turned on the empire. But sometimes people believe what Trump says. So when Trump says all the stolen Iranian assets will be used exclusively to buy American agricultural products, that's just simply not true. But some people, unfortunately, when Trump says something, even though everyone knows he's a serial liar, they, for some reason, assume that when it comes to Iran, what he says is true. But no, it's not true. What he says is nonsense.
Yeah. When, Professor Marandi, when it comes to the case of Lebanon, do you think that is there any sort of solution, any sort of short-term solution for what has happened in Lebanon? We have, you know, some sort of problems rising between the Lebanese president and the head of army, General Haikal. It seems all about, you know, the pressure that they want to put on Hezbollah. I don't know what is the Iranian perception on that and what's going on in Lebanon, because on one hand you see the government trying to do everything that the United States and Israelis, asking them to do, and on the other hand you see, even if I'm not mistaken, Laith, which is in Beirut, I talk with him every week. He said that something like 26 to 50% of the Lebanese army are Shia Muslim. It shows how difficult is that to go against Hezbollah. What is the understanding on the part of Iranians? And because the first line of the MOU is Lebanon, and it was mentioned 3 times, it shows how important Lebanon is for Iran.
Well, you have to also keep in mind that many Christians in Lebanon and many Sunnis in Lebanon, Druze in Lebanon support the resistance, and and of course, even though the Saudis and the Qataris and Turkey and the Europeans through their NGOs, they flood in a lot of money to their proxies, and they are very hostile towards the resistance, and they try to pull the different communities away from the resistance. But still, the majority of the Lebanese support the resistance. We saw that in the last elections, and in more recent polling that has been carried out, that's clearly the case, especially among the youth. Especially among the youth. So it's not just the Shia community that supports the resistance and supports the Palestinian people and opposes the Israeli regime. There are strong elements in all the other communities. But the only solution is the MOU in Iran. That's the only thing that's going to be acceptable to Iran. The Americans need a deal with Iran at some point. They need normalization in the Strait of Hormuz. The Iranians right now are showing flexibility to a degree because the siege has been lifted, the sanctions for the Iranian oil sector have been lifted, the slaughter in Lebanon has stopped for the most part, and there are negotiations over Iranian assets taking place, and some say there's been progress. We'll see. But the point is that ultimately, if the United States does not deliver on Lebanon, there will be no deal. And therefore, the Strait of Hormuz will enter a new phase. And it's not just that, it's also Iran's nuclear program. If the Americans want a deal, they have to fulfill all these obligations before we even begin negotiating over a deal for the nuclear program. And, of course, all the sanctions imposed on Iran. So, and as I said, Iran has been preparing itself since the ceasefire and since lifting the siege militarily, and has been preparing society, refilling all of its silos for food and for the essential needs of the population. So Iran knows it has this leverage, and that this leverage is not going to go away. The Americans know this, the Iranians know this, the Israeli regime knows this. If they didn't know this, they wouldn't have halted the killing in Lebanon. True, they're blowing up people's homes, they're stealing trees, they're burning forests, they're stealing olive trees from southern Lebanon, they're burning forests and all sorts of disgraceful things that Zionists do. But they haven't started the killing again. Maybe a few people have been killed or murdered over the past couple of weeks, but on the whole, they've slowed down. Why? Because they know that Iran is dead serious. And as I told you before, if there is a war between Iran and the Israeli regime, Iran will defeat the regime easily. The only reason why the regime can bomb Iran is with American tankers. American planes that fuel their jets, and those planes have to fly from Jordan. The Jordanian regime is just as bad as Israel, or Saudi Arabia, or one of these other regimes in the region. So the Israeli regime on its own is in no position to fight Iran, and even with full U.S. support, Iran would defeat it still. So they are in a vulnerable position. The Americans are in a vulnerable position. And the Iranians will continue to apply pressure until this war comes to an end.
what is the communications, or how good are the communications between Iran and Saudi Arabia, between Iran and Qatar, to make them understand that if we know that Israel sooner or later they're gonna attack Iran, and they may try to do something against Iran. Let's put it this way. Let's put the United States aside, but they have to use these countries to attack Iran if they decide to do that. And Iranian response, you mentioned that Iran can respond to Israeli attack easily. And what is the communication in your, the way that you understand right now the situation between Iran and Saudi Arabia, is that getting to the point to make some sort of security understanding, not architecture, not anything, not a structure, but some sort of understanding amongst the countries in the region?
It's hard to say. I mean, there has been some progress with the Saudis, and the Saudis did send a delegation for the funeral. Not a heavyweight delegation, but they sent a delegation. And but yet the Saudis have been putting a lot of pressure on Yemen simultaneously, and they did harass the Iranian civilian aircraft that was trying to land in Sana'a. So the Saudis have they've always had a problem. They've always had, Saudi Arabia has always had its own internal dynamics, and they once upon a time they were the home for Wahhabi and Salafi and Takfiri groups and across the world, with the support of the West. I mean, the Saudis funded so many projects in Europe and the West for these groups, and Western intelligence agencies knew this. I recall one of my friends in London, his nephew came to Iran, and his nephew, yes, his nephew, and this was during the dirty war in Syria, and his nephew, Sunni, from the Sunni community, he told me that his brother was being recruited to go to Syria, and their family, his family, this young man who came to Iran, we met. Well, he was a young man then; he's 10 years older now. But this gentleman who came to Iran, who I met, he told me that we told the police. We told them the police in London, and they said, "Don't worry about it. We have all things covered." And ultimately, this young man, his brother, I think it was his brother, went to Syria. So Western intelligence agencies, the Saudis, the Qataris, Erdogan, all of them were within Mossad. All of them were working together, Jordan and Syria. So the Saudis were always, in the past, they were the heart of this, the Takfiri groups. But then after Mohammed bin Salman, he changed. He tilted away from these Takfiri groups and Wahhabism. But, he was the person who started the genocidal war in Yemen. And he assisted the United States in its war against Iran. But at the same time, he's said on multiple occasions to Iranian leaders that he wants better relations. So it's difficult to assess where things will go, but I think that the defeat of the United States against Iran had a very deep impact in these countries. And these countries did not want the war to continue. They didn't want it to restart. And if you know, and as we've discussed before, and you've noticed, that the Iranians have not bombed Saudi Arabia, or even the Emirates, or Qatar during the last few weeks when every time when America violated the ceasefire and attacked Iran and Iran would strike back, Iran wouldn't strike these countries. It struck Bahrain, Kuwait, and Jordan.
Volume 4.
So obviously there has been some shift, but that. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you. Yeah, you're back.
Yeah, so obviously there has been some shift, but that doesn't mean that it's permanent.
When when it comes to Turkey and Palestine, you see Erdogan coming out and say he's supporting the people in Lebanon, the people in Palestine, and we know the leverage they have in Syria, the leverage they have on these people in Syria. Do you think if
they're
the
live
United
right now,
States
so I
tries
just
to
listened in
force
on
these
them.
people to do something against Hezbollah in the northern part of Lebanon,
Interesting show usually.
is Erdogan gonna go against that decision, or he's gonna somehow participate? Or let's put it this way: how about the Iranian communication with the government in Turkey and somehow communicating, cooperating with them when it comes to the situation in Lebanon and forcing these people not to do anything in the northern part of Lebanon if the United States tries to do so?
Who sings this?
Well, Erdogan, by the way, didn't come to the funeral. And he said he'll come when things settle down, which shows a great deal of courage. But no, he's not going to do anything.
Did you see that
to
video
support
with Trump's barricade with the Rough Riders?
He's not going to do anything to support Palestine.
That's funny.
He'll give speeches and say nasty things
It's
about
actually very cool.
Netanyahu and how bad Netanyahu is, but he'll continue to transport oil to Israel, cheap oil from Baku, and make his money. And the Israelis will benefit from cheap oil, and they were benefiting at a time when the price of oil was very high. So no one should count on Erdogan, but I don't think he's going to help. So no one should count on Erdogan helping the resistance, not at all, neither the Palestinians nor the Lebanese. But I don't think Erdogan is going to assist the Israeli regime. I mean, they've assisted the Israelis in Syria, obviously. He thought that he could have a big piece of the cake, and you know, but he's not in a position to work for the Israelis, to help the Israelis, because that would be very bad for Turkey's future. I mean, he has miscalculated enormously, and Syria, the destruction of Syria by Erdogan and by the regional regimes and the Israelis have strengthened the hand of Israel. There's no doubt about that. It's made things much more difficult for the resistance in Palestine and in Lebanon. After all, Jordani is a U.S. proxy, and he has been doing his best to prevent Hezbollah from getting reinforcements from Iran, from being able to smuggle assistance to the resistance. And it's quite extraordinary how Hezbollah has performed under these conditions, where the Takfiris in Syria and the pro-Western secular forces in Beirut and the Zionists in Tel Aviv, they've all been working to destroy the group, yet it has been able to do such an extraordinary job. But in any case, I don't think that Erdogan will actively work against the resistance, because the only thing that stands between him and Netanyahu is the resistance. There's nothing left. He has destroyed the Syrian wall, and he is weakened Turkey in a very big way.
Israel, by the way, in the eyes of Israelis, there are two forces right now in the region. One of them is Sunni, the other one is Shia. Acts of resistance, and as they call it, the Muslim Brotherhood, which they say that they're against us as well. Turkey, Pakistan, I don't know what is your Iranians' take on that, and how, because Israel sees the two, basically all the region has the enemy. They see no solution, and even with the case of Syria, they don't feel that comfortable with Syria. That's why they're going against Turkey. The region is getting so complicated when it comes to the case of Israel, and when it comes to Palestine, do you think that these two, the outcome of the war and the way that Israel is attacking each and every country around them? You remember, you once told me that Syria was a burden on Iranians. Iran tried to help Syria, tried to do everything for Syria, but after all, they have decided not to cooperate, not to continue, not to fight back. And right now, that burden is on the shoulders of Turkish government, in my opinion. What is your understanding of the way that Syria is today, and how the situation in the region can help the Palestinian people?
Well, this sectarian language, or the Sunnis and the Shiites, this of course is part of the project of the Western Empire. And countries like Erdogan, countries like Qatar, Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, Kuwait, Bahrain, Jordan, they've all been promoting this sectarianism because that helps them justify their inaction. And I think I may have told you this story before. I was in Beirut and I visited this Islamic center, very expensive place that was funded by Qatar. And I went with another person and I met the sheikh, the person in charge, and his entourage. And he was not a stone's throw away from Zahi or southern Beirut, but he was pretty close. You know, it was not far away. And his ignorance about Iran, about Hezbollah, about the Shia, the Sheikh, and this well-funded complex was extraordinary. He
What
knew
is
nothing.
this?
And I was like
Ignorance is
explaining to him things
some say.
in Islam,
Is it ignorance
what the
and-
Shia say, and what
It's no
Hezbollah's
excuse
policies are, and what Iran's
for the
policies are. He had no
law.
clue.
Sealed
And he couldn't answer, and neither could the entourage.
I can't
They're just
remember the
trained
exact-
to say certain things and repeat them to their audience and to the people who join the religious ceremonies and so on, but all sectarian. So they want, this is what the empire wants: a religious divide, a sectarian divide, a racial divide, Persians, Kurds, Iran is not even a particular race. Marandi, my name it's an Azeri. Marand is an Azeri city.
Once a teacher, always a teacher.
Ayatollah Khamenei
No, they used to be a
comes
teacher
from
and now they're
Khamenei. It's an
doctor.
Azeri city.
Which is kind of the
Khamenei
same
means
thing.
from Khamenei.
And you're always a
Marandi
student in
means
life.
from Marand. So the leader, he's
you don't have to use that terminology.
and the new
His
leader
life
is Khamenei
It's a vacation.
again. So he's
Same
he's
thing.
Azeri in
You
his
say the same with
the president is Azeri.
I know.
There's no
Some
particular
things are more
race or
grueling
anything.
than others.
It's a multicultural
Dangerous.
society, very dynamic.
I think some of
that's
the highest
that's one
paid
reason why it's so
jobs,
strong. But,
like underwater
but the
welding,
empire has been
yeah,
trying
underwater
to divide
welding
the region
is
into sects, and they've been
high pay.
successful
It's one of the most
for a
dangerous
very long
jobs.
time. Qatar and Al Jazeera. It's not just Al Jazeera; it's the whole apparatus. They have thousands of centers and people who they fund, or websites or media outlets across the world, or individuals that they fund, and they work within a particular framework. The same is true with the Saudis. The same is true with Erdogan and his entourage, and Jordan, and so on. So they've been promoting sectarianism, religious hatred, the West too, but religious hostility in our region, racial hostility, Kurds against Arabs, and so on, in order to maintain control. But the reality is that the only country that supports the Palestinian cause is Iran. The Palestinians are predominantly Sunni, some Christian. It's not a Shia country, but the Iranians support them, not anyone else. Hezbollah supports them, not anyone else. Ansarullah supports them. Or when Bosnia was being decimated, it's a Sunni, small Sunni country. The Iranians went there. A friend of mine, his brother was martyred there, Nawab, in the Arabic pronounced Nawab. This sectarian divide is manufactured by the empire and by its regional proxies. But people are seeing right through it now. When Iran was striking the Israeli regime, but also U.S. proxies in the Persian Gulf, the entire Arab world was cheering for Iran, except for the Takfiris. The Wahhabi, Salafi, and the others who are attached to the regimes. People were cheering. Why? Because they saw right through the propaganda. They knew that these regimes were U.S. proxies. They knew that they were in Israeli camp. So that doesn't really work. That divide, it doesn't do anything. Erdogan is not representative of Sunnis. Erdogan is representative of Erdogan, and he is not going to do anything. And the only move that he will make is if his own country is threatened by the Israeli regime. But he will be on the losing end because he helped the Israelis throughout this period, and the Israelis will have the upper hand as a result. But if the Israeli regime launches an attack on Turkey, I have no doubt that Iran will attack Israel. I have no doubt about it. So while Erdogan would never come to the aid of Hezbollah, never come to the aid of Hamas or Palestinian Islamic Jihad or the Syrian people or the Iranian people, but Iran will go to the aid of the Turkish people, of Turkey, if it is attacked. In fact, I said this before on your show. Some Syrians criticize me for this because the opponents of Iran has a lot of influence in Syria as we speak. It's not as if it's not, and the Syrian regime is not. Sorry, I don't know where I got cut off.
You said Iran has a lot of
influence in Syria, and the regime is not in a very good position. But so when I said on your show that if Jolani was to move to take back Syrian territory from the Israeli regime, Iran would support it. Hezbollah would support it. The resistance in Iraq would support it. Now, some Syrians criticize me for that, saying why would Iran support Jolani? Because the Israeli regime is the greatest evil. The empire is the greater evil. If Jolani would not do it, I mean, this is just a hypothetical. Jolani would never, bite the hand that feeds him. But if he were to somehow, he saw the light and he decided that we have to fight and take our territory back, the first people to help him would be Hezbollah, Iran, the resistance in Iraq, and so on.
Before wrapping up, Professor Marandi, I want to talk about the new supreme leader of Iran who lost his family, and we have the funeral today, tomorrow, and it was huge, as it's something personal to him because he lost his whole family. And how do you see the situation with the new supreme leader of Iran? Because many people would argue, we know that outside of Iran in the mainstream media, they don't know him, they didn't hear him, they don't know what would be his policies. What can you tell us about that?
He is, of course, a high-ranking scholar, and he's worked with his father in his father's office, very low profile. All of Ayatollah Khamenei's family members were always very low profile, always. They had no businesses, they were not seen in the public. If people had seen him, Ayatollah Sayyid Mujtaba Khamenei, on the streets of Tehran 6 months ago, 99 out of 100 people, more than 99 out of 100, would not have known who he was. You never see him on TV. He teaches, but in academic and scholarly forums in Qom and so on, not on television, not in public realm. So they wouldn't know him, but he worked with his father for decades. And so he knows, he understands politics, he understands global politics, he understands regional politics, he understands the dynamics of Iranian society. He's a high-ranking scholar himself. I believe that we'll have a continuity and that he will pursue the same policies. He's definitely not going to make this a personal issue. His father was martyred, his sister was martyred, his brother-in-law was martyred, not the not the husband of the sister who was martyred, the husband of the sister who's alive was martyred. His nephew, his niece was martyred, and many people close to his father in the office were martyred. But he is definitely going to be very. He's not going to be emotional about this. Iran, I think it's well known that the Iranians do not do things emotionally. We're very emotional people, but when we go to work, very careful. They speak about chests and weaving carpets, and there's a lot of truth in that. So the Iranians will undermine the Americans. They will undermine the Israelis, and they will continue, and they will do it with increased intensity because the enemy is on the back foot. The enemy has been severely weakened. Will it happen tomorrow? No. Will it happen next week? No, but it's a process. So I think that the policies that he will pursue will be continuity, will be based on continuity, and he will have extraordinarily large amounts of support. Look at the funeral. People can watch it live on Press TV or on other media outlets like Al Alam or the Lebanese media outlet Al Mayadeen. Since midnight last night, people were in the tens, if not hundreds of thousands, in the complex waiting for the body. And the body was taken, and people have been going and coming ever since. Huge crowds all day. The heat is like 40 degrees, 39 degrees, or something like that. And that is and it will continue for the next couple of days. That is an extraordinarily large amount of support. That shows where the Iranian people stand. They've won the war, they won the siege, they won at the negotiating table, and the unity that the country has today can be seen on television. And then his body will be taken to Iraq, and we'll see how large the funerals are. They are in temperatures that are much higher than in Tehran. So he will have a large amount of support, both at home and abroad. And he will have a strong mandate, and he will pursue the cleansing of the region from Zionism and empire.
What has happened in Iraq, recent movement, anti-corruption, whatever they call it in Iraq, and there are people arguing that it's related to Iran and Iranian influence in Iraq. Is there any sort of connection between Iran and what is going on in Iraq, or the new government is trying to do their sort of understanding, they're trying to force, I don't know what is happening in Iraq. It's anti-corruption or something else. What is your understanding of that?
Well, Iraq is very complicated, and the Americans have Iraq by the throat. You know that all Iraqi oil goes through U.S. banks, and the United States has to give permission for Iraq to take money. So Iraq exports oil. Its oil is sent to U.S. banks, and then the U.S. government has to give permission to the Iraqi government for it to take its own money. That's how it is. This is how it has been ever since this fool and monster Saddam Hussein created a situation where the United States was able to pass UN Security Council resolutions and basically control the Iraqi economy, the largest. So Iraq is in a bind, and this is something that the Iraqi government will have to hopefully deal with. But there is corruption. But of course, some of the so-called corruption is because the Americans have sanctioned Iran and control the economy, so Iran does underground business with Iraq. While the Americans strangled Iraq, something that ordinary people your viewers may be interested in knowing, Iran provides Iraq with electricity and natural gas. And because of the sanctions, often the Iraqi government does not pay Iran for months and sometimes for years. But the martyr Ayatollah Khamenei always said, don't cut off the gas. Don't cut off the electricity. The people of Iraq need it. They don't have electricity, the summer is very hot, and true, we're not being paid, and true, we need the money, and true, we need the gas and the electricity, and we're sanctioned, but they need it. And so Iran has never cut it off. But the business that is done between Iran and Iraq does not use the banking sector. So a lot of it is officially corruption, but it's not really corruption. It's the only way that you can do it. So it's complicated. There may be some elements of this in it. Some of it is really anti-corruption. But I think that the funeral being held in Iraq and the cooperation of the Iraqi government and the provinces in carrying out and holding the funeral procession in Iraq says a lot.
Thank you so much, Professor Marandi, for being with us today. Great pleasure, as always.
Thank you very much for having me, Nima. It's always a great pleasure.
Dunkin's $6 meal deal. 2 delicious wake-up wraps.
Such treachery is not accepted. Let me see the secret in the signal intercepted. Yes, it's the keys I'm unlocking plenty doors with. Bored with the repetitious themes we're at war with. Nothing seems to change, so the members need to switch up, or else we see the same resolutions in this get up. It's the setup designed to keep you running in a loop. Watch with repeat while they're ready in the truth. Feeding you the lies, though the truth is your pursuit. You see the moving parts in cahoots.
But I think I need to turn around. Can't let my fear get the best of me. Cause this thing I'm running from, thinking might be my destiny. All the roads lead the same way. When you're at the South Pole. And there's no other way but straight on up when you're down at the bottom of the hole. Nowhere to run. Nowhere to run. My town. My town. Nowhere to run. Nowhere to run. My town. My town.
Up against the wall, bricks digging in my back, pushing in my skin like the needle in the track. It stings like the cracks when the whips gave, permanent marks and scars on the backs of the enslaved. But that game has been played, it's over and unplugged. You thought I was just a dumb thug to use to run drugs, or one of your other stereotypes? Don't. I'm here to catch, kill, and bury the hype. Only after its exposure. And once I have some closure, I'm regaining my composure. But at the moment, you're revving up the motor. The sun's heat is glowing. I'm set to supernova. Stressed like a soldier with a sick case of shell shock. Trapped like a rat in an enemy cell block. This here is your last chance. You're pushing me too far. I'm not the one with nowhere to run, son. You are.
Nowhere to run. Nowhere to run. My town. My town. Nowhere to run. Nowhere to hide. My town.
Country boy making moves with them city folk. Spitting so sick of CDC trying to get a quote.
Nowhere to run. Nowhere to hide. My
This here is your last chance. You're pushing me too far. I'm not the one with nowhere to run, son. You are.
Kane's got it all to do here. He taps Gemini. He'll have to time this just right. And here comes the game plan. That's an absolute banger from the skipper. What a finish.
Hey guys, how you doing? Coach Mitchell. We're talking about today about the DSS and diplomatic
security service. A lot of people don't know about that, but it is an agency within the Department of State. Now,
Not too overdone. Sometimes, yeah, when the purpose is to go overboard. There's a joker on my ass. You can't forgive feel so bad. Can you spare a dime? I need a couple more dollars. Get me on down the line.
Hey there, how you doing after folks? I tell them all the same thing, old black and broken, they think that's a joke, but I ain't playing, it's a whole lot of truth though. What I'm saying, see my bones cracked, but I'm so pro-black, and I got so many bills, and they ain't no stacks. Hey there, Bojack, sucking on your lollipop, I don't think I can get a ride over to the trolley stop. I believe in my first gig, head to the next one, sleep when I'm dead, I'm trying to get these checks, son. Get the studio in full rock tempo, my credit score is in permanent limbo. Speed up the tempo, I gotta get the paper. You're gonna show my wages isn't that any flavor. You can keep the weed and take your mouse. I'm trying to get Bowling Green in my bank account. When I went down to the gold digger just to get a little bad to do. When I opened up my wallet, there was nothing but a house. When I told him my situation, I asked him, what do you got for me? He said, I got this knuckle sandwich, and I'll give it to you for free. Oh, can you spare any gold, brother? Can you spare a dime? A couple more dollars now just to get me on down the line. Somehow we all made it out from the front now. Papa plan to get the play for a dumb clown. Took the less travel road standing out amongst crowd. Old head with the fire of legit. Bald heads, you can tell they alive when they spit. Bald heads, I won't flex with the line and his kids all set.
Did you learn how to tickle those keys?
Careful to lift up the disc and not bring out all the weeds and dump them on the alleyway. But one kid you would see on the tractor, and he would be smoking and drinking with beer in his little tractor box, and he would just come out. I'm telling you a true story now, at full speed, and just cover the whole alleyway. Not my favorite neighbor, he would never think of that. This was a neighbor who rented my uncle's place.
Therapy, memory, so many things.
If you'd say either stick out his tongue at you, or he'd flip you the bird, and I would be with my 86-year-old grandfather, and he'd say 85, and he'd say, now there, please, you're raising a storm of dust. You're going to get every mite in the country on my vines. Would you please do that? And he'd say, F you, and go out. So, in the old days, they say, yes, that's the Thompson kid. And he was the one that was a bad seed. There was no blank good. And we want nothing to do with that guy. And everybody knew it. But today that would be judgmental. So it's the whole rise of the social sciences, sociology, psychology, dash studies, the whole therapeutic culture. And when you combine that with the First Amendment, that there's no limitations on expression, and other things that have been widely by the Warren Court expanded, All I know is you just go, I mean, there were a lot of things bad with the 40s, 30s, 40s, and 50s in this country. There was, you look at a movie and every African-American person's a servant, okay? So that was bad. They didn't want, and they weren't all servants.
Yeah, Woody Strode and all of those westerns, he was sort of he was a hero of sorts, right?
He always was. They made a whole movie where he was a star. John Ford made him the star of Sergeant Rutledge. That was a good movie. And he was sort of the star. He was in the background as the sidekick or the employee of John Wayne and Man Who Shot Liberty Valor.
And isn't that the benefit of our free thought, free thinking, is that there are critics that grow up in, for example, the film industry, and they have alternate ways of
Sidney
presenting.
Poitier was in Lilies of the Field. He won the Academy Award. It was a wonderful performance. He was the moral paragon of the whole city. So, but my point is that when you have that unlimited freedom, you have to have brakes on it. The reason the First Amendment and other amendments like that work so well is that they assume the founders of a normality of behavior. They thought that even though, I don't know, there's been studies done, but I would say of the founders who signed the Declaration of Independence or were involved in the Constitution, maybe 30% were not regular churchgoers. But they were deists. They believed that Christianity was very important for other people, even if they didn't believe completely, because there was a moral code that suppressed the appetites. That was very important. They thought the nuclear family was very important, and they thought the small town shame culture was very important. I remember telling my parents as a snotty-nosed brat when I was 17, I said, I'm going to go to UC Santa Cruz, and I'm never going to come back till Christmas, because I'm so tired of this Selma little gossip rumor manger, and they all, I drove through town, and I did a rolling stop at the stoplight. Then next day, Mom, I went to the library, and the librarian said, I hear you're racing around Selma, aren't you? I said, what did I do? Well, Mr. said he was behind you, and you did a rolling stop. That's no business. I said, what is it with this city? Can I sneeze? I'm going to go to Santa Cruz. So I go to Santa Cruz, and the first thing, my dad drops me off at the dorm, and then I walk down the dorm thing, and I lean against it, and I fall through the wall because they've all kicked in the walls and put posters over it to hide it when they get drug parties. And then the next person, they have a little sign that says hashish, marijuana, LSD, mescaline, with prices right on the wall. And then down at the end, there's this guy who is a male prostitute, and I notice that all these weird people in suits and ties are at a college dorm way up on the hill, and they're knocking on the door, and they're signing this little thing. And so finally I walk over there, and I said, excuse me, why are all you guys going to Roberto's room over there? And they said, why, are you in line? I said, what? And then they started laughing, and I asked everybody, I said, oh, he's servicing all these people he meets at this convention center, very wealthy business people. I thought, what does that mean, servant? What is this? And then the guy, his name was Jamie, he was a nice guy, and one day I look over there, and he's got a locksmith, and we all had keys, and he's drilling a hole in the university door, and he's got this locksmith, this used bolt locks. I go, what are you doing? He said, well, everybody comes and steals stuff. Yet he was a electronic genius, so he had all this expensive. I said, they wouldn't steal stuff in their own dorm. Well, they were. So I thought, wow, all these idealists, they steal, they act prostitute, they break all the drug laws, and then this was really funny. When I would be in my first seminar, we all sat on the floor. We had a carpeted room. We didn't want to go to a classroom. John Lynch was a great professor. And then I've noticed that half the people did not bathe. And then the girl next to me, she lifted up her arm. I about passed out, and she had something called patchouli oil. It was so strong, and she hadn't shaved her legs or arms or anything. And then this one guy pants went really loud, but he didn't try to suppress it and go outside or say I'm sorry, just started laughing. And then I noticed that my roommate, who I won't mention, but I really liked him, he told me he did not take a bath for 6 months. 6 months. And my dad said to me, next time he's there, spray him with Right Guard. And so I did. He almost killed me. I sprayed him with Right Guard. And so my point is, when I came home for Thanksgiving, not Christmas, I wanted to get home as quickly as possible. And I went straight to my grandparents and helped them with the walnut, helped pick walnuts. They said, I am so happy to be home. And he said, we're so happy, we missed you, Victor. And Lila, who was crippled, she goes, Twinnie, you're back. I said, yes, she was bedridden, 60-something. I said, I gotta get it. She goes, well, we're always here. And then it was like the world I all thought was parochial, and staid, conventional. It was normal, it was good.
It was
and
civilized.
That place was insane. Because everybody was pushing the law to the absolute maximum.
With no customs or conventions.
The worst thing, and I'll finish, because there were some good things about UC Santa Cruz. I get a knock on the door. And the guy is in a white coat. And he says, we are from the University Health Center. I said, yes. And he said, we're going to every room on campus. And I said, why? He said, there's a new virus out, a sexually transmitted disease. I said, well, what's a sexually transmitted disease? I was a 17-year-old virgin. I didn't know what it was. And he said, it's called herpes. I said, well, herpes? He said, yes. And it's kind of like the AIDS scare. He said, and it never goes away. And it can kill you. It can get in your eyes. It gets on your lips. And I said, is that big sore? I said, no, that's herpes 1. But we think that Santa Cruz is target 0. We're looking for the original patients. We want to trace every one of their sexual contacts. And I said, really? And we want to stop this, because this is where it started in California, they thought. And they had some people from the Santa Cruz County Health Department with a little clipboard. And I said, well, what do you want to know? How many sexual partners have you had? I said, since I got here, 0. I said 0, and they said, no, we mean since you got here. I said, I'm
running out of
turned
space
18.
for this one, so I'm going to stop and post
and they
it.
said, you don't have any sexual partners. You've never had sexual intercourse.
Yeah, we're going to do more reading in a little bit.
And they said, okay, how about your room? I said, he's not here, I don't know. Has he had sexual partners?